A map isn't really a guide to where you are. It's more a story about who you think you are. For centuries, the most trusted charts in the world had places on them that never existed. Phantom islands, golden cities, whole continents drawn from pure imagination. They sat right there next to real coastlines, waiting for sailors who would never find them. So you get these rational mapmakers, and they insisted on including lands no one could ever reach. These cartographic dreams launched real expeditions. They toppled empires, they show our deepest fears, our ambitions. Why would explorers risk everything for a myth? A monk would be working in a scriptorium with a candle. He's not a sailor, he's drawing the whole story of creation on one page. That's a Mappa Mundi. Its true north was divine. Jerusalem is at the center. A perfect circle, and around it, the three continents form a T shape inside the ocean. That's the T and O map. It wasn't about accuracy, it was about order. A visual sermon, the world was a stage for biblical history. So when you see a walled garden at the edge of Asia, labeled Paradisus, that's not a mistake. It's a destination for the soul, placed east where the sun rises, the earthly paradise, unreachable since the fall, but spiritually essential, and the kingdom of Prester John might be in Africa or Asia. A beacon of hope, a symbol of the faith's reach. These weren't navigational errors, they were articles of faith, in ink. To remove them would be like tearing a page from a sacred text. The map was a guide for the spirit, not a tool for the body. That shift in purpose from spiritual to practical, it starts with a library, with the rediscovery of ancient texts. Texts that described a world the monks had never seen. That library they found held a dangerous idea. The world the ancients described was bigger, stranger. Not like the T and O maps, a scholar in Florence or Lisbon had a problem now, a crisis of authority. On one side of the desk, a sea captain's log, new observations. On the other side, Ptolemy's massive volume, 2nd century, or Pliny the Elder's whole encyclopedia of natural history. These weren't just old books. They were the pillars, the structure of knowledge preserved. To question them was to question learning itself. So Ptolemy's calculations said a great southern landmass had to exist. To balance the northern continents, cartographers drew it in. Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It wasn't a guess, it was a logical necessity. Ancient theory demanded it. It had to be there, so it was. Same for the island of Thule, a mist-shrouded place Pliny wrote about, the edge of the known world. No modern sailor had really found it, but to leave it off a map, that was an omission. It would mean the classical masters were wrong. This created a tyranny. A map could be precise, based on the latest data, and yet in the Southern Ocean you'd still find this phantom continent, sketched in with dotted lines. Hopeful, empirical evidence bowed to textual authority. The map wasn't just a record of what was seen. It was a statement of belief, what was true because wise men from a golden age said so. This devotion to past wisdom wove right into another source, even more potent for the unexplorable, not from dusty scrolls, from the living breath of sailors. Storytellers, the Hereford Mappa Mundi is a good example. It's huge, a single piece of vellum, a map that's also like a small cathedral. At the top, outside the circle of the world, there's Christ in judgment. Jerusalem is at the center, and then out at the far eastern edge past even India, there's a walled garden with a gate, the Garden of Eden. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a fact. The map said paradise had a real location. It was just placed beyond reach, guarded by a fiery sword. That's sacred geography. The mapmaker's pen was guided by faith, not by a ship's log. They charted the lands of the biblical magi. They marked where mythical creatures lived, the monstrous races from travel tales. You could call these decorations. But they were more. They had two purposes. First, they affirmed the literal truth of Scripture. If the Bible described Eden, then Eden had to be on the map. Its presence validated the Christian worldview. Second, they issued a warning. Those blank spaces at the edge, the Terra Incognita, weren't just physically dangerous. They were spiritually perilous. Here Be Dragons wasn't just about beasts, it was about moral wilderness. The unknown was where you could lose your way, your faith, your soul. By including these unreachable lands, the map showed a complete reality. The physical world and the spiritual world weren't separate. They were layers of the same creation. A journey across the ocean was also a journey toward salvation or damnation. The map was a guide for both, but even with this high spiritual purpose, another force was always there. Whispering to the cartographer, a much more earthly desire, the hunger for gold, for glory, for a name that would last. Gold has a way of turning a myth into a business plan. You'd have a royal court, the air thick with ambition. A cartographer would unroll a map. He'd point not to a known trade route, but to a blank space in the ocean. West of Ireland, he called it Hy-Brasil, a misty island, a perfect society and immense wealth. Or his finger would trace the rivers of South America, stopping at a place labeled El Dorado. The Gilded One, these weren't hopeful legends anymore. They were sales pitches. The mapmaker was often on the payroll of a trading company or a monarch desperate for new revenue. His job wasn't just to record, it was to advertise, to make the unknown not just visible but irresistible. Every dotted outline of a phantom island, every sketch of a golden city, was a promise printed for investors. It said, fund a ship and this could be yours. This commercial cartography created a loop, a dangerous loop. A map would show a wealthy land, so an expedition would sail. They'd return with stories, often misunderstood fragments of real cultures. A tribal leader dusted in gold for a ceremony becomes a king in a city of solid gold. Those exaggerated reports would go right back to the mapmaker, who would engrave them with even more certainty on the next chart. The lie gained authority. With every iteration, so men sailed for years. Lives and fortunes were spent chasing a mark on a page, a mark that existed only to get them to sail in the first place. The map was no longer a reflection of the world. It was a catalyst for reshaping it, for better and for worse. This collision of greed and geography did more than drain treasuries. It set the stage for a different kind of encounter, where the dream on the map met the complex reality on the ground, with consequences that would echo for centuries. You have this explorer standing on a deck, the ship's heaving, salt spray everywhere. He's squinting at a landmass through the mist, makes a crude note in a logbook. Then months or years later, he's in a warm study trying to explain that shape to a scholar. The scholars asking for latitude for landmarks, and the sailors describing a feeling, an impression. Or a story the crew heard from a local who spoke a different language entirely. It was a telephone game played across continents. A single misunderstood word could create a continent. Take the name Frisland. It was on maps for over a century, a sizable island south of Iceland with bays and mountains. Armadas were planned around it. The truth was likely a misreading. A cartographer, maybe looking at a damaged report, took a sighting of part of Iceland or the Faroes and duplicated it. Gave the duplicate a new name. Once that shape was inked onto a prestigious chart, it became real. Other mapmakers copied it faithfully, not wanting to leave out a known place. The error gained authority with every copy. The phantom had a passport, but not all phantoms came from honest confusion. Sometimes the game was rigged. A captain returning from a failed voyage, needing to justify the cost, might embellish. A distant smudge became a lush island. A few gold ornaments became evidence of a city paved with them. And the mapmaker, often dependent on patronage from the people funding these voyages, had little incentive to doubt. To question the tales was to question the entire enterprise. Risk being labeled a pessimist, a traitor to progress, so the scribe's pen would hover and then commit the story to parchment. The line between a mistaken coastline and a deliberate fiction was blurred. A grey area where ambition filled in the gaps knowledge could not, and in that space of half-truth and yearning, one of the most persistent phantoms was born. Not an island, a person, a king who never was, ruling a paradise that never existed. A story so powerful it would warp the map of the world for generations. The line between a hopeful mistake and a lie can be thin, but sometimes a mapmaker crossed it on purpose. In the late 1500s, a man in Venice named Niccolo Zeno published a map and a story. He said it was based on letters and charts from his ancestors, two Venetian brothers who sailed the North Atlantic in the 1300s. The Zeno map had incredible details. Islands with Norse names, a place called Estertiland, a monastery on an island called Frisland. It was a sensation. It suggested Venetians had reached the New World before Columbus. But there was a problem. Almost none of it was true. Scholars now think Niccolo Zeno fabricated the whole narrative. He used fragments of real voyages and existing maps. It was a patriotic hoax. He invented islands to give Venice a claim, to restore its fading maritime prestige. The map was propaganda, drawn not from a ship's deck, but from a kind of desperate national pride. A similar story happened on the other side of the world. Decades later, an aging Greek pilot named Apostolos Valerianos went to the Spanish court. He claimed that, under the name Juan de Fuca, he had discovered the Northwest Passage decades earlier. He described a broad strait on the Pacific coast around 48 degrees north. The Spanish were desperate to find this shortcut. They listened. They sent an expedition to check his claim. They found nothing. Valerianos was likely seeking a pension or a reward. He probably embellished a minor discovery or invented it entirely, but his description was so specific. And the desire for the passage was so intense that the Strait of Juan de Fuca started appearing on maps. It taunted explorers for 2 centuries. They kept looking for his strait. And in a twist, a real waterway was eventually found near that latitude. The fiction, in a way, willed a truth into being by focusing generations of search. These weren't errors of measurement. They were cartographic frauds. In an age where a single map took months to reproduce, and news traveled at the speed of a sailing ship, disproving a compelling lie was nearly impossible. A fraudulent entry, once printed in a respected atlas, gained a life of its own. Other cartographers would include it, fearing their map would be incomplete if they omitted a known place. The phantom would persist through dozens of editions, a ghost in the geographic machine. This blurry boundary between fraud and hopeful speculation tells us something. It shows that a map has never been a neutral document. It's an argument, a promise, a projection of desire onto parchment, whether driven by national glory or personal reward, or just the human need for the world to be more wondrous. These deliberate deceptions show we've always been willing to draw the world we wish for, not just the one we see, and no myth embodies that wish more completely than the dream of a lost, perfect civilization. Waiting just beyond the edge of the known, a city of gold that refused to stay off the map. Aristotle looked up at the stars, but he was also thinking about the earth. He thought about the balance of it. All that land in the north, Europe and Asia, it had to be balanced out. There had to be an equal weight of land in the south. It was a necessity, a kind of symmetry. That idea moved through time, through Roman thinkers, through the Middle Ages, right to the mapmakers of the Renaissance. They gave it a name, Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, and for 2,000 years it wasn't just an idea, it was something that had to be there. On the maps it started as a faint outline, just a blur at the bottom, but then, with each new map, it got more solid. Cartographers drew it in, they gave it coasts and mountains and harbors. They wrote notes on it in Latin, recently discovered but not yet fully known. They filled it with gold and spices, an entire continent built from pure reasoning. A phantom, but not from a sailor's story, from a philosopher's equation, and this phantom had force. It sent out ships. In 1606, the Spanish explorer Quiros thought he found it. He landed on an island in Vanuatu, and he claimed the whole southern continent for Spain. He called it Australia del Espiritu Santo. He was on a beach, but in his mind, he was at the edge of an empire. Later, the Dutch sent Abel Tasman to map its coasts. He sailed below Australia. He saw New Zealand, Tonga. Every bit of land he saw, he mapped it as the northern edge of that great southern continent. The maps updated, the phantom got more detail. It was a cycle. The theory said where to sail, and whatever they found, they made it fit the theory. It only ended when someone went looking for the truth, not the idea. That was Captain Cook. On his second voyage, he had orders to find out once and for all. He sailed south, deep into the cold, into the ice and fog. He circled the globe so far south that there was no room left for a continent. He wrote in his journal about the ice, fields of ice. The beautiful theory met the cold fact. Terra Australis Incognita wasn't there. Cook didn't just map the emptiness. He erased a world, but when the phantom died, it left something behind. The name Australia drifted north and stuck to the continent they'd been sailing past for years. The symmetrical dream was gone, but it had pushed them to map the real ocean. It shows you the power of an idea. When something is too logical, too elegant, it can stop you from seeing what's really there. You'll follow it to the end of the world, but not every phantom comes from high thinking. Some come from a darker place, a raw, simple fear, the terror of being lost. The blank space on a map was a kind of terror. For a sailor, it meant no landmarks, no ports, just the open gray sea, and you couldn't leave it empty. So the mapmaker filled it. They filled it with their fears, a sea serpent coiled around a ship, a whirlpool labeled Charybdis, the phrase "Hic sunt dracones, here be dragons." It wasn't often written, but the idea was there. These weren't just drawings, they were a function of the chart, a language. That serpent wasn't just a monster. It was the sudden squall, the hidden reef, the loneliness of a voyage that could last years. The monster gave a face to the anxiety, the deep anxiety. And this theater of fear included the land too, at the edges of the known world. Mapmakers put monstrous races on distant coasts, the blemmy men with faces on their chests. The cyopods who used their one giant foot as a parasol. These weren't just oddities, they were boundaries. They marked the limit of the familiar, the human. Beyond this line, the map said, you're not just seeing new land, you're leaving what is like us. The world becomes alien, unpredictable. The map drew a safe circle. And outside that circle was a gallery of warnings. It turned the fear of the unknown into something you could see, something you could name, but this had another edge. A political edge. A map full of wonders and terrors wasn't just for sailors. It was for kings and queens. It was a tool. A monarch could look at a map and see their influence reaching the page's edge. Their ships facing leviathans, their flag near lands of strange creatures and rumored wealth. It told a story of national courage, a divine right to explore. To conquer, the perils on the map justified strong navies. They justified royal funding for expeditions. The monsters validated the mission. They said, look what we brave for God and country. Look at the chaos we bring order to. So the cartographer, often working for a crown, wasn't just a geographer. He was a propagandist. His art stoked pride. It attracted investors. It legitimized expansion. That terrifying blank was filled not with truth but with a story, a narrative, and that narrative sent real ships into real storms. Chasing shadows they helped to draw. A map could be a declaration of war, drawn in silence. In a royal chamber, the air thick with incense, a cartographer would unroll a new chart. Candlelight would catch the colors, the coats of arms stamped across empty spaces, a continent not yet reached, an ocean not yet crossed, already bearing the king's seal. This was more than geography, it was a preemptive strike. You ink a speculative coastline, you claim it for the crown. You establish a paper right to a place no European had ever seen. A cynical act of soft power, the map became a legal document, a symbolic fence around a dream. Take the myth of California as an island. For over a century, from the mid-1600s, prestigious maps showed it separated by a narrow strait. This wasn't just a navigational error, it served a purpose. By showing California as isolated, mapmakers could separate it from the contested mainland. It simplified the claim, made the territory a neat possession on the page, easier to grant or sell or defend in European courts. The fiction had utility. Then there's the Portuguese chronicler Gaspar Frutuoso. He wrote of the Ilha dos Demonios, the Isle of Demons, in the frigid North Atlantic, a place of howling spirits and perpetual storms. Charting such a horrific place served a purpose. It warned rival sailors away from waters Portugal wished to control, and it amplified the legend of Portuguese navigators. The only ones brave enough to skirt such terrors, their maps didn't just record hazards, they created them to deter competition. Every phantom island, every exaggerated coastline crowded onto a national map. It projected an image of sprawling dominion. A viewer in London or Paris would see a world teeming with their nation's flags, a visual argument for imperial destiny. The empty spaces on the globe were being filled, not with truth but with ambition. Cartography became the quiet engine of empire, turning parchment and ink into the most potent propaganda. This political theater could only last as long as the blanks remained, but a revolution was coming, one that would replace the artist's speculation with the mathematician's precision, and begin the slow process of erasing the phantoms for good. The beautiful lies on the map began to fade. It wasn't a sudden thing, it was a quiet, persistent ticking. A new instrument, the marine chronometer, a clock that could keep time on a rolling ship, that solved the ancient riddle of longitude. For centuries, sailors could find north and south, from the sun, from the stars, but east and west was a guess that could send you into a coast you thought was miles away. The chronometer changed that. You'd compare the time at a known port like Greenwich to your local sun time, and you could calculate your position with real accuracy. The ocean stopped being a featureless void. It became a grid, a place you could pinpoint. This revolution in measurement had a parallel, a revolution in thinking. In London, the Royal Society took a motto: nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it. They wanted verified data, eyewitness accounts, observations you could repeat. So the tales, the gilded cities, the monstrous races, they were met with skepticism now. A mapmaker couldn't just copy from an old text or a sailor's story. He needed proof, a ship's log with coordinates, a surveyor's sketch with triangulated points. Gerardus Mercator understood this need for a functional grid. His famous projection, 1569, it wasn't about making the world look right. It was about making it usable for sailors. It transformed the curved earth onto a flat chart, where a straight line meant a constant compass bearing. You could plot a course, but even Mercator, this architect of practical navigation, he included a phantom. At the North Pole, he drew the Rups Nigra, a massive black magnetic mountain pulling all compass needles toward it. He needed an explanation for magnetism, and where science was silent, a myth served. It was a last holdout of the old way, right in the heart of the new. The correction of the world was slow, meticulous. It happened voyage by voyage. A captain would return with a corrected chart, proving an island wasn't where the old map said, or proving it wasn't there at all. the phantom would be crossed out, erased, and that blank space, that white void, it started to be seen as honest. It was preferable to a beautiful lie. A blank said, "We do not know," and that was the beginning of real knowledge. This erosion of myth on the map, it mirrored a shift in the mind. The unknown was being redefined. It was no longer a spiritual testing ground, or a gallery of horrors, or a treasure chest. It was becoming a puzzle. A series of questions waiting for measured answers. The map was shedding its skin as a storybook. It was putting on the clothes of a tool. And as the last phantom islands were being erased from the charts, a new kind of mythical land was taking shape. Not in the past, not on the horizon, but in the future, a perfect society, engineered by reason, waiting to be built. The world was becoming known, and in that knowing, something was lost. The last phantom islands were gone from the charts, just empty ocean, but the human mind, it doesn't like a vacuum. The mystery didn't die, it just moved. Inland to the interiors of continents, to the poles, to the places the new maps couldn't fill yet. That was a new romance, the romance of the blank space itself. Africa is the example. By the mid-19th century, its coasts were charted meticulously, but the center on European maps was often just an emptiness. A gorgeous, terrifying blank, sometimes labeled Terra Incognita, sometimes just drawings, elephants, lions. That blank wasn't a failure, it was an invitation. An open page, and into that void came a new kind of story. The adventure novel, lost cities, hidden kingdoms, explorers. The map wasn't supplying the myth anymore. The myth was supplying the purpose for the map. The question changed. It wasn't what wonders exist out there. It was who would be first to plant a flag in the heart of the unknown. That shift is profound. The map stopped being a narrative. It became a challenge, a to-do list written in geography. You look at the maps from the polar age. They show the known coastlines of Antarctica, and then nothing, a white expanse. That white wasn't passive, it was aggressive. It called to men like Scott and Shackleton. It whispered about a final earthly first. The mythical lands were gone, but the journey to conquer the blank remained. The dragons were replaced by blizzards. The golden cities by a geographic pole, an abstract prize, and the drive to fill the unknown. It just found new symbols, not sea serpents but dotted lines. Proposed railway routes sketched borders hoped for colonies. The speculative courses of rivers, the blank space became a theater for imperial ambition. Dressed in the language of science and progress, to map it was to claim it, to understand it was to control it. The phantom had evolved. It wasn't a place you could sail to anymore. It was a problem you could solve, a space you could own. This modern hunger to fill the blanks, it led explorers to chase the most persistent legends. Stories that refused to be mapped because they were never meant to be found. Off the coast of Ireland, the sea could trick you. In all that grey, sailors had a story. A persistent dream, Hy-Brasil, a perfect circle of an island, hidden in mist. They said it would appear from the fog only once every 7 years. Its roots were old, probably from Irish myth. A land of the ever young, a place with no sorrow. But this Celtic otherworld didn't stay with the storytellers. By the 1400s, it was drawn on the charts. The map sailors actually used, it was just there, a solid disk west of County Clare, drawn with the same lines as real coasts and harbours. The map had turned a legend into a fact. And that had consequences. The island became a destination. In 1480, John J.J.R. sailed from Bristol to find it. Then later, a Captain John Nisbet said he landed there in 1674. He told a story about an old man on the island who gave his crew gold and silver. These reports, probably from misreading fog or rocks, or just made up, went back onto the charts. That made Hy-Brasil feel more real each time. It fed on itself because the map showed it. Men went to look, and because men went to look, some claimed they saw it. So it stayed on the map. The power was in the ambiguity. It was always just over the horizon. That 7-year cycle explained any failure. You just came at the wrong time. That made it impossible to disprove for centuries. The Admiralty's mapmakers making the official charts had a problem. To take Hy-Brasil off was to say for certain what was in that empty ocean. But to leave it was to keep a fairy tale. For them, leaving out a possible danger was worse than including a myth. So the island stayed, a ghost in the official record. Its dotted line showed how long a rumor could last. It wasn't until the 19th century, with the Royal Navy's thorough surveys, that the North Atlantic was shown to be empty where Hy-Brasil was supposed to be. The last marks were erased from the charts. The circular island vanished, not into mist, but into the cold certainty of measured lines. Hy-Brasil's time on the map shows a permeable boundary. How a local story, a piece of cultural memory, gets picked up by the machinery of exploration, stamped with the authority of science. It was a folk belief wearing the clothes of geography. And for hundreds of years, you couldn't tell the difference. That dance between a temperate myth and navigational fact finds a partner, a stark contrast. In a much hotter and more hazardous phantom of the Pacific, Frisland was a ghost island, but it had a coastline. On the maps, it wasn't small. It was a big island with its own bays and mountains. It sat there in the North Atlantic, south of Iceland, and for more than a century, from the 1500s into the 1600s, it was just a fact. It was there. Navigators used it to plan routes. Kings thought about its strategic position, but no one could ever actually find it where the maps showed it. The origin was probably something simple, a bad misreading. An early mapmaker, maybe working from a damaged sketch or a confused report, likely saw the southern coast of Iceland. Or maybe the Faroe Islands, and he duplicated it. He gave that duplicate a new name, Frisland, and once that shape was engraved onto a copper plate, it had its own life. The error was copied, then recopied. Each time it gained more false authority. To leave it off a new map would seem like an omission, like your map was incomplete. So the phantom stayed, a typo written across the ocean. Then its credibility got a huge boost, a fraudulent one, from the infamous Zeno map in the 1580s. That map claimed to show Venetian discoveries from 200 years earlier, and it featured Frisland right there prominently. Now the island was part of a grand story. A patriotic narrative. It wasn't just on navigation charts anymore. It was in the story of exploration itself. It had a history. It had a pedigree. So when the English explorer Martin Frobisher sailed west in 1576, looking for a northern passage to Asia, he had these charts. He saw the huge cliffs of Greenland. He checked his maps and he made a critical error. He thought the land in front of him wasn't Greenland. He thought it was the fabled Frisland. He claimed it for Queen Elizabeth I. He spent weeks charting its coasts. He gave English names to its capes and sounds. He was mapping a real place, but he was using a phantom's name. The resources for his expeditions, the hopes part of that was chasing a cartographic mirage. Frisland's long life on the page shows something, a terrifying principle. A simple mistake, once it gets the permanence of print, can become a geographical truth. It can redirect voyages, it can drain treasuries, it can risk lives. Sailors died in icy waters looking for harbors that only existed on paper. The map wasn't a passive record, it was an active force. It could create a reality. Or a devastating imitation of one. Some phantoms were islands, others were much bigger. They weren't misplaced land, they were entire misplaced worlds. Lost civilizations waiting in the jungle, their golden spires drawn from hope and hearsay. The story of Prester John was a search for a savior, a king who wasn't lost, just waiting. It started with a letter. Around 1165, this document began moving through Europe, addressed to the Byzantine emperor and then the Pope. It said it was from a ruler named Prester John, Presbyter John, a priest king. He described his kingdom as a paradise beyond Persia and Media, a place of peace and immense wealth. Pepper grew wild there, rivers flowed with gems. His palace had a magic mirror to see his enemies. He commanded an army of millions ready to march to Jerusalem's aid. For Europe, stuck in the Crusades, this was electrifying. A powerful Christian ally behind enemy lines, the dream took hold. It was a geopolitical fantasy. And it needed a place, so mapmakers gave it one, but they could never really pin it down. On those early medieval maps, his kingdom floated in Asia, somewhere beyond the Caspian Sea or deep in India. It was a hopeful label in a blank space. Regnum Presbyteri Johannes. Then Mongol envoys reached Europe in the 13th century with tales of powerful Eastern rulers. Hope surged. Maybe the great Khan was Prester John or his descendant. Expeditions like Friar William of Rubruck were sent partly to make contact. To forge an alliance, a pincer movement to crush Islam. They found the Mongols, but no Christian utopia. When that hope faded in Asia, the myth just moved. The focus shifted south to Africa. Rumors of ancient Christian kingdoms in Ethiopia, like the real Negus, blended with the legend. By the 1400s, Portuguese maps placed Prester John's domain in the highlands of Abyssinia. The Phantom Kingdom had crossed a continent on the page. This wasn't a mapping error, it was a relocation of hope. The cartographers weren't correcting a mistake. They were preserving a necessary idea. The map kept the dream alive, giving it a new address when the old one was empty. This had real consequences. Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa with instructions to seek Prester John. They saw his potential kingdom as the key to encircle the Islamic world, control the spice trade, secure global Christian dominion. Every encounter with an African ruler was seen through that expectation. The map's legend shaped diplomacy. It fueled expeditions. It caused centuries of misunderstanding. The contrast is clear. El Dorado was a destination of greed. Prester John was a destination of faith and strategy. One was a place to loot, the other was an ally to recruit. The maps that hinted at his realm weren't selling treasure. They were selling salvation and victory. They turned parchment into a prayer and a battle plan. And they show that sometimes the most powerful lands on a map aren't filled with gold. They are filled with hope. The most unreachable land on a map wasn't an error. It was a command. Cartographers had this unique task to plot paradise. The Garden of Eden, the earthly paradise, had to be somewhere real. Scripture described it, so maps had to show it. This was sacred geography. Its rules were absolute. On the great medieval Mappa Mundi, you'd always find it at the far east where the sun rises. Often on a high mountain surrounded by a wall of fire or an impassable ocean, a place set apart since the fall. Its presence was a doctrinal necessity. A map that left out Eden, left out the origin of the world and the destiny of the soul. Take the Fra Mauro map from 1459, a masterpiece of its time. It's dense with ports and trade routes, a practical document for Venetian merchants. And yet, there at the top, in the east, is this detailed illustration. The Garden of Eden, a walled enclosure with Adam, Eve, and the serpent. A river flows from it, dividing into the 4 biblical rivers of the world. This wasn't decorative. It was foundational. The map was saying all geography, all these kingdoms and coasts flowed from a single, sacred source. Every journey was a movement away from that lost perfection. The mapmaker's pen was tracing a story of exile. This belief had consequences. It spurred expeditions. If paradise had a location, maybe a pious traveler could find its outskirts. Witness its blessings from a distance. The search for the earthly paradise got tangled with the search for Prester John, for the fountain of youth, for the source of the Nile. To travel east was to travel backward in sacred time, closer to creation. When Columbus reached the Caribbean, he was convinced he was near the earthly paradise. The sweet air, the lush vegetation, the gentle people, it all fit. He wrote to the Spanish monarchs that the earth wasn't perfectly round, but shaped like a pear with a nipple-like prominence. And on that prominence, he believed, sat the Garden of Eden. His physical voyage was, in his mind, a spiritual return. The ultimate power of putting Eden on the map was this: it made theology the author of geography. The world story had a defined, sacred beginning printed right on the parchment. The map wasn't just a record of what was, it was a diagram of why things were. It explained human hardship as a distance from that eastern point. It offered a silent consolation that the world's chaos had an origin in a perfect, orderly garden. And that one day, maybe, the map could be read in reverse as a guide back. But not all phantoms came from such high purpose. Some came from the raw, grinding desperation of being lost on an endless sea, where a sailor's survival could hinge on a story he told himself. Gold and paradise had their pull, but commerce was the real engine. What haunted empires for 400 years wasn't a place of treasure, but a shortcut. The Northwest Passage, on the maps it looked straightforward, a clear channel cutting right through North America, a straight shot from Europe to the spice markets of Asia. They drew it with such certainty, a wide strait separating a bulky America from a slender Asia on the other side. The ultimate commercial mirage, a promise of unbelievable wealth right there on the parchment. And it wasn't just a hopeful idea, it felt like a geographical necessity. European economies needed to get around Ottoman control. The map had to show it so trade could believe it. That belief was fed by a few things: misinterpretation and sometimes fraud. Early explorers Martin Frobisher, John Davis, they'd find these icy inlets and bays. Come back with sketches. A mapmaker in London, looking at a rough drawing of a narrow channel, might connect the dots, turn a bay into the start of the open sea. Then there was the fraud, the most famous one, the voyage of Juan de Fuca, an aging Greek pilot. His detailed description of a broad strait at 48 degrees north was pure invention, probably for a pension. Yet it stayed on authoritative maps for 200 years, like a siren's call. Another sailor, Luke Fox, wrote about hoping to find the passage so England could have the wealth of the Indies and the treasure of Peru. The map was the prospectus for that dream, but this pragmatic myth had a brutal reality. The passage wasn't a strait, it was a frozen maze, a labyrinth of islands with channels choked by pack ice most of the year. The maps showed an open sea route. The truth was a crushing white hell. Expeditions vanished into it. The Franklin expedition of 1,845, 2 stout ships, 129 men, that was the most famous tragedy. They sailed into that labyrinth with maps promising a corridor, and they met an impassable wall of ice. Not one person survived. The searches for them, ironically, mapped more of the true, brutal archipelago. Each failure, each ship crushed, slowly corrected the beautiful lie. That clear channel on the map got replaced by 1,000 jagged coastlines. Still, the dream was so potent it reshaped the land itself on paper. Cartographers, under pressure from trading companies, would leave a promising inlet open-ended, label it Probable Passage West. They drew coastlines vaguely, leaving room for hope. They created a speculative geography where the wish for a route dictated the shape of continents. This wasn't about spiritual truth or ancient authority. It was about ledger books, national advantage. The unreachable route on the map became a geopolitical fixture, as solid in the minds of kings as any phantom island. It drove exploration, yes, but at a horrific human cost, all for a line on a chart that refused to acknowledge the ice. That line had power, though. It points to something deeper. It wasn't just data or deception that gave these old maps their force. It was artistry, a deliberate, breathtaking beauty that made the imaginary feel inevitable. The copperplate locked the truth in place. An engraver would spend months, maybe a year, carving a map into a sheet of copper. Every line was a physical groove in the metal. It wasn't a sketch, it was a permanent investment, and once that plate was done, it became the source, the template for hundreds of prints. Now picture that engraver in a workshop. His pattern books are open. Those books held standard decorations, compass, roses, sea monsters, ships. His job was to make something beautiful and authoritative. And beauty needed balance. A huge, empty ocean on one side looked wrong, unfinished, so he'd check his pattern book. He might pick an island, a nice shape with a few harbors. He'd engrave it into that empty space. It completed the picture. It made the map feel whole. That artistic choice had a permanent cost, because once that speculative island was in the copper, it was incredibly hard to remove. To fix a map, you didn't just draw over it. You had to hammer out the copper from the back, smooth it flat, and engrave the area again. Difficult, expensive work. It could ruin the whole plate. For the publisher, it was a business calculation. Was correcting this one detail worth it when the map was selling fine? Often the answer was no. The mythical island stayed. It got printed, edition after edition. It moved from a decoration to a standard feature, a cartographic habit. Other engravers making their own maps would copy it from the famous source. The phantom gained immortality not from evidence, but from artistic convention. From economic inertia, the materials helped spread the error. Paper was precious. Printing was the physical act of pressing paper onto that grooved copper. Over hundreds of prints, the fine lines would wear down, details blurred, coastlines softened. A later printing from a worn plate might make a vague island look even more mysterious, its borders fading into the sea. And these maps traveled. They were folded into pockets stained by salt water, annotated by hand. A captain might write a note in the margin about a sighting, and the next owner would take that note as fact, putting it into a new map. The chain of information was fragile. It was mediated by artistry, by economics, by the slow decay of metal and paper. The map you held wasn't a snapshot of the world. It was a palimpsest of decisions, artistic, financial, practical, layered over time. This very human process of creation meant the imagined world always had a foothold in the documented one. And as these beautiful, flawed documents circulated, they created a shared dream, a consensus about the unknown that would prove much harder to dismantle than any single expedition. The copper plate was a machine for making mistakes permanent. An explorer comes back with a rough sketch, charcoal on damp paper. A draftsman in a warm studio redraws it. He cleans up the lines, maybe he misreads a smudge. His version goes to an engraver. The engraver works in reverse, carving lines into metal. He might smooth a jagged coast because it looks better. He might add a decorative ship where the draft was blank. Then the printer inks the plate, presses paper onto it, and the map is born. Every step in that chain was a chance for error to creep in. And then become truth. Take the island of California. The myth started with a romance novel, a Spanish fantasy from 1510. It described an island paradise ruled by Queen Calafia. But for over a century, maps showed California correctly as a peninsula. Then in 1622, a Carmelite friar, Antonio de la Ascension, wrote a report. He suggested, based on limited exploration, that the Gulf of California might extend all the way north, cutting it off. A mapmaker for a popular Dutch publishing house saw this speculation. He engraved a beautiful map. It showed California completely surrounded by water. It was visually striking. It made geographic sense of the unknown north. And it was copied widely because it was easier to copy a beautiful, clear error than to question it. Once that image was in the atlases of Blieu and Jansonius, it became the standard. For a mapmaker in Paris or London, omitting the island would make their map look outdated. The error, through repetition, became the fact. This was the cartographic game of telephone. A bay slightly too large on one map becomes a gulf on the next. A misspelled native name becomes a new city. The island of Frisland we discussed was almost certainly born this way. A duplication of Iceland or the Faroes, etched once and then copied for 100 years. The technology didn't just transmit information, it amplified noise. And it gave that noise the authority of print. A map was not a photograph, it was a story told and retold, each teller adding their own inflection. Yet within this fluid, error-prone system was a deep puzzle. If a map is our picture of the world, and that picture is built from layers of copied mistakes, then what are we really looking at? We are not looking at the world. We are looking at a consensus, a fragile agreement about what the world might be, shaped as much by the limits of the printing press and the aesthetics of the engraver as by the land itself. The map became a record of human perception, in all its flawed, hopeful glory. It showed not just where places were, but how ideas traveled, and the most persistent ideas were the ones that fit a narrative. The ones that filled a blank beautifully or promised something we desperately wanted to believe. That blank space on a map, it was a philosophical problem. To leave it empty meant admitting a failure of knowledge, but to fill it in with a plausible guess, that was asserting a kind of intellectual control. The cartographers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, they were steeped in this powerful idea that the world was a rational, ordered system, a system you could understand in its entirety through the right mix of ancient wisdom, logic, and observation. An empty space on the chart was a crack in that system, a flaw in the machine, so they filled it, not with random scribbles but with reasoned conjecture. The great southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita, that was the ultimate example. It wasn't drawn from a sailor's tall tale. It was drawn from Aristotle's physics. From the need for symmetry, the mapmaker in that act was making a statement. The world is complete. It obeys rules, and I, through reason, can show you its shape even where I have not been. This creates a tension, two different approaches to the unknown. The first is humility, the honest, stark admission of I do not know. That's the empty space, the honest void. It's a silent invitation for future discovery. The second is ambition, the drive for theoretical completion, the need for the picture to be whole, even if some pieces are made of guesswork. That's the phantom coastline, the dotted line, a hypothesis given visual form. For centuries, the second approach won, because a map was more than a tool. It was a model of reality, and a model full of holes was seen as a poor model. It suggested the creator didn't understand the underlying principles. The map became a philosophical argument. An argument for a knowable, orderly, and finished world. But this intellectual drive was matched by something deeper, more personal, a psychological need. The human mind has a profound aversion to uncertainty. A blank space is not just a lack of data, it is an anxiety. It whispers of chaos, of the unpredictable, of things beyond our comprehension. Filling that space, even with a monster or a golden city, gives it a name. It domesticates the terror. It turns the formless, unknown into a shaped story. A story you can navigate, even if the navigation is purely in the mind. The mapmaker, by drawing the dragon, wasn't just decorating. He was performing a kind of cognitive magic. Building a mental shelter against the vast, intimidating mystery of the world. The map became a comfort, a way to look at the great, frightening expanse and say, I have charted it. I have given it order. Whether that order was real or imagined was almost secondary. The act of creation itself was the solace. This blend of high philosophy and deep psychology, that's what gave the old maps their strange power. They were at once rigorous and dreamlike. They tried to logic their way to paradise and to sketch their fears into submission. They were humanity's attempt to draw a box around the infinite. And in that attempt, they revealed more about the cartographer's mind than the cartographer's world. A completed map was a shield. In that time, a voyage could just disappear. Storms were constant, illness was constant, the unknown wasn't empty space, it was a threat, a kind of void. To open a chart and see the world as a finished circle, every coast drawn, every creature labeled, that was a reassurance. It whispered that the universe wasn't just an endless wilderness, it had edges, it had a structure, even the monsters on the parchment were a comfort. Because they had a place, they were known, catalogued, their terror was contained in the ink. The great Mappi Mundi were the ultimate expression, the world as a perfect disk bounded by ocean. Jerusalem at the heart, and at the very rim, just before the blank parchment began, those unreachable lands, paradise, the realms of monstrous races. They weren't errors, they were a necessary border, a conceptual wall. They marked the line. On one side, the ordered cosmos humanity could understand and map. On the other, the utter chaos beyond. To cross that line was to leave God's design. The map itself became a sacred enclosure, a cognitive safe space. You could look at it and feel that everything, in principle, was accounted for. No surprises left. Only places you hadn't visited yet. This need for a bounded world is ancient. Many cultures saw their homeland as the center of a world island, surrounded by a circular ocean. Beyond that, only primordial waters, or the lands of gods and demons. The map gave visual form to that deep-seated longing. It turned existential anxiety into a picture you could point to. But this psychological safety, crafted in quiet scriptoriums, was about to be tested. Not by philosophers, by sailors, men who had to trust these comforting pictures with their lives, out on the real, unbounded sea. The individual navigator, squinting at a chart in a rolling cabin, faced a different reality. The beautiful, complete circle on the page met the howling wind and the featureless horizon. The chart said to turn here. It showed a deep bay, a safe harbor. But the lookout saw only waves, gray, endless waves. This was the navigator's nightmare, not the storm you could see, the land that wasn't there. For the men on those decks, the phantoms on their maps weren't academic. They were life or death. A captain might steer toward a promised island for days, burning through water, through morale, and find nothing, or he might swing wide around a charted reef. A reef that existed only in an engraver's mind, adding weeks to a journey, dangerous weeks. The parchment promised a world that was known, complete. The ocean replied with a horizon. A featureless, mocking horizon. The correction of the world happened in that gap, the brutal gap between the story and the sea. It was written in ship's logs. Not in royal decrees. A first mate would make a note, sailed through the position of Frisland, found no bottom at 100 fathoms, no birds. That single entry, repeated voyage after voyage, was more powerful than any ancient text. It was the slow voice of experience, arguing with authority. The map in the captain's cabin was often a palimpsest, hand-written notes in the margins. This island false, coast lies further west. The official chart, printed with such certainty, became a document of doubt. Each note was a hard lesson. Bought with time, with treasure, sometimes with lives, the myth of the Northwest Passage consumed ships for centuries. The theoretical map was so compelling. It promised a shortcut to empire. The reality was a frozen labyrinth. It crushed hulls, it crushed hope. The Franklin expedition vanished into that white silence. Their fate a testament to the cost of trusting a beautiful idea over the brutal facts, over ice and latitude. This real-world testing was the only force that could erase a phantom. It required a consensus of absence, not one captain but many, all reporting the same empty sea where the map showed land. The process was slow, as fast as a sailing ship could carry a report. But it was inexorable. The ocean was the ultimate auditor. It demanded proof. It gave no credit for good stories. Yet these cartographic dreams, in their dying, left something behind. They gave us names. The island of California is gone from the maps, but the name remains on a peninsula. The dream of a southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita, bequeathed its title. To a real landmass, Australia, the stories of golden cities, of lost kingdoms, they didn't just fade, they seeped into our literature, into our films. Into our very idea of adventure, they became the bedrock of genres. The map's beautiful lies taught us how to dream of the unknown, and in doing so, they shaped the spirit of exploration itself. The phantoms were erased from the charts, but they didn't go away, they just moved. They left geography behind and went into the imagination. They became the settings for our biggest stories. When a map couldn't hold a perfect society anymore, the novel could. Thomas More's Utopia from 1516 is literally about a place that isn't there. He wrote it as a traveler's tale, a man who sailed with Amerigo Vespucci. More gave this island a location, a shape, a society, all the details you'd want on a map. It was a direct transplant from cartography into satire. The island became a mirror to hold up to Europe. This migration created a genre, the lost world story. Plato's Atlantis was a philosophical parable, a civilization lost to the sea. But by the 19th century, with maps still having blanks, it became a destination. A real place for adventure. Jules Verne sent people to the Earth's core, to strange islands. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Lost World, where they find dinosaurs on a plateau in South America. These stories are the direct descendants of the cartographic phantom. They take the dotted line on the old map and give it flesh, and dinosaurs, and danger. They feed that same need, to believe that just beyond the known, the rules are different. The past is still alive, wonders are waiting. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels might be the peak of this. It's a travelogue written like a ship's log, dry, observational. Gulliver goes to Lilliput, Brobdingnag, Laputa. Each one is a mapped society, a land with its own bizarre customs and geography. Swift was satirizing the travel narratives of his day, the exaggerated maps. He took the cartographer's habit, filling blanks with strange races, and turned it into a critique of human nature, politics, science. The book shows that the unreachable land is the perfect place for philosophy. Because it's not real, it can tell us sharp truths about our own reality. This move from parchment to page shows something. The human need for other places doesn't end. When the age of discovery shrank the world, when every coast was charted, the blank space didn't leave our minds. It just moved. Terra Incognita became the unexplored planet, the distant galaxy, the digital frontier. The Phantom Island became the hidden valley in a fantasy novel. The quest for El Dorado became a heist for a mythical treasure in a film. The map's beautiful lies taught us how to structure a quest, how to build a world that comments on our own. So these lands were never truly unreachable, only physically. In every other way, we've been visiting them for centuries, in our books, our dreams, our art. They're more alive now than they ever were on a chart. Their legacy makes us look at our own time. What are the modern unreachable lands we're charting now? The perfect artificial intelligence, the colony on Mars, the simulation we might already live inside. These are our new speculative geographies, drawn not with pen and ink but with code. Equations, business plans, we are still the map makers. We're still drawing the worlds we wish for or fear, just over the horizon of the possible. The parchment has changed. The impulse is the same. Your phone screen shows a map that feels absolute. It knows where you are, it knows the traffic, it can name a cafe in a city you've never seen. This is perfect digital knowledge, or it seems that way, but the old ghosts of cartography, they haven't gone away. They've just learned to code. Digital maps are built on layers of data. Scraped from satellites, from street view cars, from user reports, and sometimes that data glitches. A software error can duplicate a town. A phantom street appears running through a field. An algorithm trying to connect dots might create a road that was planned but never built. These are our new phantom islands, not drawn by an artist's hand, but by a flawed line of logic in a server farm. They cause real confusion. Delivery drivers get lost. Emergency services are routed to empty lots. The map, for all its silicon precision, still tells stories. And sometimes the stories are wrong, but the more profound myths have also moved online. The same human drive that put Hy-Brasil on parchment now scrutinizes satellite imagery for the lost city of Atlantis. Conspiracy theories flourish by taking old maps out of context. A medieval chart shows a landmass in the Atlantic, and it's held up as proof of a forgotten civilization. Ignoring that the mapmaker was working from rumor and classical myth, not secret knowledge, the speculative coastlines of Terra Australis Incognita become evidence for an ancient, global empire. These modern narratives treat historical maps not as products of their time, but as cryptic puzzles. They see intention in every era, confirmation in every decorative monster. It's the ultimate irony. The very myths those old cartographers included as convention or hope are now used to accuse them of hiding a truth. Our new Terra Incognita is often labeled with two simple words. No data. On your digital globe, zoom in on certain remote forests or sensitive military sites or vast stretches of ocean. The crisp imagery dissolves into a blurry, pixelated void. That blank space functions just like the edge of a medieval Mappa Mundi. It marks a limit. Beyond this line, the map says, our seeing machine does not go. And into that void, speculation rushes. What is hidden there? What don't they want us to see? The unknown is still framed as a secret. The dragon has been replaced by a firewall. Even our grandest new maps are acts of hopeful speculation. Astronomers chart exoplanets. They infer their size, their orbit, their possible composition from the faintest wobble of a distant star. Artists render these worlds. They paint imagined mountains under alien suns. These are the coastlines of Terra Incognita for our interstellar age. They are dotted lines drawn with mathematics and hope. We are filling the cosmic blank with narrative, just as we always have. This unbroken thread is the key. The monk drawing Eden, the engraver adding Frisland, the coder correcting a glitch, the theorist scanning for Atlantis. They are all engaged in the same deeply human project. Making the unknown knowable, giving the void a shape, a name, a story. Sometimes that story is spiritual, sometimes it's commercial, sometimes it's a bug in the system. But the impulse is constant, to look at a blank and feel not fear but possibility. To believe the next scroll, the next click, the next telescope image will finally reveal the complete and wondrous world. Our tools have transformed from pen and parchment to satellites and simulations, yet the cartographer's most essential material remains unchanged. It is the human mind, forever dreaming lands that lie just beyond the edge of the page. These maps weren't wrong. They were actually a kind of achievement, a synthesis. If you think of the mapmaker as just someone copying coastlines, you've missed what they were doing. They stood at this crossroads where art met science, where faith met exploration, commerce met legend. Their workshop was a place of alchemy. You'd have a sea-stained logbook on one table, sketches from a recent voyage. On another, the heavy volumes of Ptolemy, ancient authority, maybe a letter from a king wanting new lands to claim, and in their own mind, the training that demanded a beautiful, balanced composition. Their job was to weave all that together, the new observation, the old text, the royal command, the aesthetic ideal, weave it into one coherent picture of the world. So putting a phantom island on the Mappa in that context, it wasn't an error. It was often the most rational choice. If two respected classical authors described a land, and a sailor's report seemed to hint at it, to leave it off would be negligent. It would create a gap. The map was a statement of everything known or thought to be known. A blank space was an admission of defeat. a speculative coastline was a hypothesis. An invitation for verification. These men were working inside the paradigms of their time. A paradigm is like an operating system for thought. It decides what questions are worth asking, what sources you trust, what a finished product should look like. The medieval paradigm placed scripture and ancient wisdom as the highest authorities. So a map without Eden, it was incomplete. The Renaissance paradigm venerated classical learning but also embraced new discovery. That created a tense, fascinating blend on the parchment. The mapmaker was navigating those conflicting demands, not ignoring them. Take the Fra Mauro map. Made in a Venetian monastery, it's meticulously detailed. It uses the latest Portuguese sailing charts from down the African coast. It shows real progress. And yet, at its edges, it still shows the earthly paradise, the kingdom of Prester John. This isn't a contradiction. It's layering. The map is a palimpsest. You can see the old writing beneath the new. The new empirical data is there, but it hasn't erased the older doctrinal framework. The map holds both worldviews in suspension, a snapshot of a mind in transition. To judge this by our modern standard of satellite precision, it misses the point. It's like critiquing a symphony for not being a spreadsheet. They were different tools for different purposes. Our maps today answer, where is it? Their maps often answered a deeper set of questions. What does it mean? Where did we come from? What should we hope for? What should we fear? The coastlines were just one layer of the answer. The dragons, the golden cities, the blessed isles, those were the other layers. They told a story about humanity's place in a cosmos that was moral, mysterious, charged with meaning. So we should see these cartographers not as makers of mistakes, but as master synthesizers. They were artists painting a portrait of reality as their culture understood it. They were scholars piecing together a puzzle from fragments of text and testimony. They were storytellers using the language of geography to narrate the epic of human destiny. Their legacy isn't a collection of errors to be corrected. It's a library of dreams to be interpreted. In every dotted line, every decorative monster, we can read the fears of the age, the terror of the open ocean, the anxiety of spiritual peril. In every speculative paradise, we can read its hopes for divine order, for earthly wealth, for allies in a cosmic struggle. These maps are ultimately mirrors. They reflect not the shape of the continents, but the shape of the human heart, in its endless quest to comprehend an immense and bewildering world. And that brings us to the final thread. The one that connects every phantom island, every unreachable shore across the centuries. The first map was probably just a story drawn in the dirt, a line for the river, a circle for the hill, a mark for where the hunting was good. It wasn't just information. It was a way to tell a story, to say, here's where we are, here's where the danger is. Here's where we found food. That instinct to turn space into a story, it's ancient, it's everywhere, and early maps were just that instinct made physical. They were the first storyboards, and the places you couldn't reach, those were the plot devices. The dragon's lair at the edge of the kingdom, the treasure island over the horizon. The sacred mountain where the gods lived. These weren't decorations, they were the conflict, the reward, the moral of the tale drawn right onto the parchment. They turned a dry list of coastlines into an epic, where every sailor could be a hero, every voyage was a quest, every blank space was a chapter not yet written. That drive to make a narrative, that's the thread that connects everything. It connects the monk painting Eden on a manuscript to the engineer programming a rover to map Mars. The monk was telling a story of spiritual origin. The Renaissance explorer was acting out a story of national glory. The modern scientist is writing a story of cosmic possibility. The tools change, the core impulse doesn't. We look at the unknown and we can't help but give it a plot. We fill it with characters, angels or cyclopes or little green men. We imagine a journey through it, obstacles to overcome, a revelation at the end. Think of the hero's journey from myth, the call to adventure, the road of trials. The ultimate boon, that structure is right there in the lines of the old maps. The call was the dotted line leading to El Dorado. The road of trials was the sea serpents, the Isle of Demons. The ultimate boon was the grace of the earthly paradise or the wealth of a new continent. The map didn't just show you where to go, it showed you why to go. What you'd face, what you might gain, it was a script for ambition. That's why those old charts feel so alive to us now. They're not cold technical documents. They're charged with drama. They're wishful and fearful and arrogant and hopeful all at once. They show that for our ancestors and for us, geography was never just about the land. It was about the meaning of the land. What does this place represent in our story? Is it a promised land, a testing ground, a resource to claim, a mystery to solve? The unreachable lands were the ultimate symbols. They held all the meaning the mapmaker could give them. So when we look at the coast of Frisland or the mountains of Terra, Australis, we're not just looking at mistakes. We're reading pages from a grand collective novel, a novel humanity has been writing about itself for thousands of years. The setting has shifted from the ocean to outer space. The monsters have evolved from leviathans to black holes, but the author is the same. It's the human mind, forever using the map to tell the oldest story. The story of venturing into the blank, and in doing that, discovering not just new worlds, but new versions of ourselves. The story of the map is really our story. It's about this need to understand, and this deeper need for the world to mean something. Those phantom lands on the old charts, they weren't errors. They were fictions we needed. Without them, a map is just a skeleton, a dry list of facts, but those stories, they put flesh on the bones. They gave the unknown a face. Sometimes it was a monster. Sometimes it was a paradise. They turned a chart into a kind of conversation between what we knew for sure and what we hoped was true, between the hard coastline and the soft power of a story. Every dotted line was a question, and every golden city drawn in the margin was an answer, a promise that the world wasn't just vast and empty, but layered. Full of purpose, waiting for courage or faith. The cartographer in his workshop, he wasn't just drafting, he was weaving threads of observation, ancient texts, royal orders, and pure imagination. His pen was guided by the spirit of his age, by its fear of hell, by its dream of heaven, by a thirst for gold, a hunger for glory. So the map became a mirror. Held up to the culture that made it, we don't look at these charts to see where things actually were. We look to see what people believed, what they valued, what they were willing to risk everything to find. Now the coastlines have been corrected. Satellites have scanned every ocean, but the legacy of those beautiful lies is everywhere. It's in the names on our maps borrowed from myths. It's in the shape of our adventure stories which still follow those old quests. It's in our own pursuits where we chart digital frontiers or dream of new worlds to colonize. We are still the mapmakers. We still face blank spaces. They just look different now. The voids aren't in the oceans. They're in our understanding of the universe, of consciousness, of the future itself. And we still fill them with stories, with theories of multiverses, with visions of a tech utopia, with anxieties about what's past the edge of our knowledge. The tools changed from parchment to petabytes, but the human impulse is the same: to look into the unknown and not see emptiness, to see potential, to draw a line, however speculative, and say, here is a possibility. Here is a dream worth sailing toward. So you close the old atlas, its pages whispering of lost voyages, and you think about your own uncharted places. The blank spaces in your life, in your time. What stories are you using to navigate them? What hopeful phantoms guide your decisions? A map is never just about the land. It's about the mapmaker, and in the end, that's the most enduring territory, the landscape of the human mind, forever drawing its own edges, forever dreaming of what lies just beyond.